Good evening. I think we probably ought to get started. We do have people pouring in. There's still folks coming in. We have roughly about 79, almost 8. Yeah, we now have 80 people that are on.
Wow.
Good evening, Governor Hickenlooper. It's good to see you.
Hi.
We have a full night of questions for you and are excited to have you join us. Just so that everybody knows how this will work, what we're doing is we'll have a 3-minute opening from you, Governor Hickenlooper. We'll have 2 minutes of questioning. For each question that we ask, we'll give you 2 minutes to answer. And then we'll give you 3 minutes at the close. But before we get started, I want to just introduce our county party chair. So Dana Torpe-Newman. And she just has a few things that she wants to share with the participants. So, Dana, take it away. Uh-oh.
I muted myself because my children were screaming in the background. I am so excited that so many of you wanted to attend this event with Governor Hickenlooper. I just wanted to say a couple of words and advertise a couple of things that are coming up. So I'm going to share my screen. As many of you are probably feeling, this is a time when we're feeling pretty helpless and hopeless. And I need all of you to be involved in what we are doing with the Douglas County Democratic Party. And so I am going to ask you right now, I'll add this to the chat as well, to answer 2 very brief questions using Slido. You can actually hold your phone up to the QR code and it will take you to the 2 questions that we are asking. You can see that for tonight, we're going to use the enter code #John because Governor Hickenlooper is with us tonight and we're trying to make sure we keep track of what night we collect our data. And really what I am asking of you is for feedback in how I can help engage more of you in party events and operations, how we can support our candidates most effectively, and how we can win elections. And I want to know what you're looking for from our county party. So if you could do that, I will also add the link to the chat once I am done speaking so that you can access it. I can't get my slides to go. I even practiced. I also just wanted to make a couple of announcements about upcoming events. On Sunday, June 7th from 4 to 6 p.m., the Roxborough Indivisible group has put together a fundraiser called Hope and Change. It will be featuring many of our already elected officials, our candidates, and our county candidates. The purpose of this fundraiser is to both support our Douglas County Democratic candidates and the Food Bank of the Rockies. I would love, love, love to see all of you there. Our county candidates need all of the support that they can get. As many of you who are in Castle Rock know, based on the hate crime that we learned about today that was committed there, Castle Rock and Douglas County are places where we have a lot of work to do. This is not being governed the way that we want it to be. The people that are elected right now do not agree with our values, but we need your time, we need your funds if you're able to support our candidates to get the current people out of office. I also wanted to advertise that your county commissioner candidates, Darian Wilson and Lisa Neal Graves, are having a virtual town hall with Phil Weiser on Monday, June 8th at 5 p.m. All of our events right now are virtual. 1, to keep everyone safe, and 2, so that more people have access to these. So please come and talk to Phil Weiser and our county commissioner candidates, who are also our moderator and timekeeper. Last month, Lisa and Darian also made happen a very successful food drive for the Douglas and Elbert County Task Force Help and Hope Center, and they are going to do that again this month. Last month, they collected an enormous amount of donations. This month, we're hoping to do even better. The collection dates will be from June 12th to the 16th. And we will have collection locations all over Douglas County so that for easy drop-offs. And we may be still looking for drivers to drop off the donations on Wednesday, June 17th. And then I think I have one more slide. Finally, there will be a virtual coffee with Representative Jason Crow. Well, we like to refer to him as Congressional Representative and House Impeachment Manager Jason Crow. He is our representative for Congressional District 6, and he and Darian and Lisa will be having a virtual coffee on Saturday, June 13th at 10 a.m. The more you know about what's going on with our local candidates, the more enthusiastic you will be about supporting them. So I beg you, please attend these events for our local candidates. And I will also, don't forget, I'll put the Slido code and link in the chat. So please answer those 2 questions. Thank you so much for giving me a few minutes. And now I will mute myself and turn off my camera.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I didn't introduce myself right away. My name is Lisa Neal Graves, and I am a candidate for Douglas County Commissioner, District 2. And we also have, and I'm moderating tonight, and we also have Darian that's online as well. Darian, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Darian Wilson, and I'm running for Douglas County Commissioner for District 3, which is Highlands Ranch. But both of our races are at large, so we hope that everyone in Douglas County will vote for both Lisa and me.
Awesome. So Governor Hickenlooper, thank you so much for making time for us tonight. And we really appreciate your presence here. As we said, we are going to give you 3 minutes for your opening statement. And we have several questions. And for those of you who are interested in asking questions during this call, please type your questions in the chat and we will do our best to get to them. We have a lot of questions, so I'm not really sure that we're going to be able to get to all of them. But what we will do, Governor Hickenlooper, is get those to your campaign so that you can answer those questions and perhaps provide that information back to Douglas County Dems. So thank you. We will yield the floor to you for your opening.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, Douglas County Dems, for having me today. I don't have to tell you, it has been a particularly tough few weeks in this country, and we've all seen the horrible videos and heard the heartbreaking, traumatic experiences of people of color. We've been hearing it for decades. And I think enough is enough. The crisis of systemic racism is not the only challenge we're facing. This global pandemic has also underscored the need for a change in a broken Washington. I come at this differently. I was a geologist. Got laid up. I opened a brewery. I'm a small business guy who got into public service because I thought there had to be better and more innovative ways to work together. Small business is the backbone of America. And this crisis has made it even more clear than ever that Washington is filled with people that don't have that experience. And that's why they've written relief packages that have benefited the largest, most troubled companies who had the consultants and the lobbyists to help them cut to the front of the line. From the beginning, I was saying that the federal government had to set aside a specific pot of money for the smallest of small businesses. And now it turns out that a lot of that money was snatched up by the LA Lakers or publicly traded companies who could have gotten their access to capital in a million different ways. I brought people together to get things done as mayor and as governor. We did fast tracks. We took the economy from 40th to 1st. We did methane regulations. We expanded healthcare on a bipartisan basis. And I've said for a long time that Washington's broken, and I've certainly said it was a lousy place for a guy like me who likes to get stuff done. I still believe that. But I have a decision to make. Do I just sit and criticize? Do I criticize Washington, or do I try to fix it? And the biggest impediment to getting things done in Washington right now is Mitch McConnell. He has single-handedly prevented bipartisan legislation from coming to the floor on all manner of things, whether it's universal background checks or getting money out of politics. He's again and again, he's focused on getting the fringe right-wing judges appointed. We need to get him out. And it won't be easy beating Cory Gardner. He has millions of dollars in dark money. It's going to take everything we have. But I think I've proven that I can build the coalition to beat him. I won in 2010, 2014. I know I can beat him with your help. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for your opening. So the first question, as you know, you mentioned this in your opening about the struggles that we're having as a nation with respect to racism. And so the first question that I have for you is, what is our collective responsibility to ensure that we stop the dehumanization of Black people?
Well, our collective responsibility, if you believe in this country, you believe that we are all created equally. And yet, I mean, slavery has been the nagging, persistent shame of this country for far too long. It's denied the opportunities to a large portion of our population. You go from, Jim Crow and forced servitude to lynchings and the war on drugs. It's been one continuous bias and disenfranchisement of people's basic rights. When I first came in as mayor, I was committed to diversity. I'd never run for student council when I got elected mayor of Denver in 2003, but I made sure that my first cabinet and my senior staff were 50% people of color, that we had 60% women. And in 2.5 years, Time Magazine called me one of the top 5 big city mayors in America. That wasn't me. I barely knew where the bathrooms were. That was all these talented people I brought together. I proved how well diversity works. While I was governor, we went through every single board and commission. We hired recruiters. We left, for the first time in the history of this state, we had a person of color on every single board and commission in the state of Colorado. And I think those are the foundations, but we've got to make sure our education system is fair to everyone. That's the fulcrum of equality. That's the pathway to a better life. And it starts with early childhood education, 3rd grade literacy, apprenticeship programs, as I mentioned, all these things lead up to, for those who wanted a college degree, but all that education is tied into basic opportunity. And again, for far too long, that's been tied to your zip code, your class, your race, all the detriments that make these challenges so formidable.
Thank you. Our next question is really about COVID-19, as you might imagine. A lot of what we've experienced in Colorado is not as broad and bad as it has been in more densely populated areas. Colorado is fortunate that we've got large land mass and not that densely populated. So one of the core questions that we have here is, what are your 3 core initiatives that are needed to get out in front of the COVID-19 pandemic and ensure that we don't have the experiences that we saw back in 1918, 1920 with the Spanish flu, right? Where the cities opened up too quickly and, the reinfections actually were worse the second time than they were the first time.
Well, hopefully we can learn from our history. And as we were just talking about the denial of basic equal rights to too large a section of our population, we don't always learn from history the way we should. Right. But this is a classic example. I will never, ever be able to understand why the White House and so many Republicans in the Senate and the House poo-pooed COVID-19. We'd had all the warnings, the predictions. Now it was in China. We knew it was out of China. At the very least, they should have built up a supply chain for testing. So the first thing, obviously, is you have to have testing capacity. Look at the countries where they've addressed the issue successfully. You start with testing, right? And then you have to be able to, if someone's test positive, you have to trace who they talked to, make sure that you can isolate them so they don't infect more people. That's how you begin to hold it in check. But you've also got to make sure that, and we got to start doing this now, that we get out ahead of those people that have pre-existing medical conditions. Certainly those people that are in denser parts of our city or denser parts of our country who maybe can't easily isolate where they are at home, and we're forcing them to infect each other, spread the disease more rapidly. So we've got to get way out ahead. If you've got diabetes, if you've got hypertension, make sure that those people are protected. If they're over 65 and have any of those pre-existing conditions, they get special attention. And then how can we ask our essential workers, the people that make sure our food gets delivered to the supermarkets and we can buy it at the supermarkets, how can we ask them to go to work without protective equipment? that they should deserve not just face masks, but face shields. And they should be able to have all the protections that anybody has in an office. We should make sure that there is social distancing, which again, after testing and tracing and isolating, social distancing is part of the essence of the response. And for us to deny these basic safety precautions to the essential workers, and I'm talking public employees at all levels, I'm talking not just police and fire, but also the people that drive public transit, and make sure that we have mobility for all of our citizens. All of, not just the doctors and the nurses, but everybody in the whole medical pyramid that helps us protect those most vulnerable people. We got to make sure they're protected. And we did a piss poor job of it this time. And I mean, there are lots of, I tried to not do a bunch of criticizing of this because we're in a pandemic and we got to pull together. But testing, the lack of protective equipment, and the unwillingness to protect those most vulnerable, to get the message out to where they can hear it, to where they are in a language that they can understand it in many cases. That's got to be a highest priority.
Got it. All right, so the next question, you sort of started down the path and it just bleeds right into healthcare generally. And you know, the Affordable Care Act really didn't support a single payer healthcare system. Should it? And if you believe it should, or I should just say why or why not?
Well, you know, and for my entire adult life, I have believed that healthcare should be a basic right and not a privilege. I helped a friend start a community health center in 1973 when I was still in school, and he now has 210 locations. And to see what he's done to disenfranchised communities and you know, marginalized communities, and giving them a sliding scale. If they have no money, they pay no money. Giving them an opportunity to have basic health care, it has been inspirational for me. When I got elected, we embraced the Affordable Care Act. We expanded on a bipartisan basis, which, trust me, it was not easy, but we expanded Medicaid to 400,000 people. I mean, if you knew how many women were able to get mammograms or prenatal care who otherwise would have been denied, we rejoiced in that expansion. We created one of the most innovative exchanges in the country and added another 100,000 people to get coverage. But that's still not enough. And I think the fastest way to get to universal coverage is to use a public option on a sliding scale, and we can pay for it by, you know, finally getting our government last among nations to be able to negotiate bulk discounts for prescription drugs. But that is how we finance it. And then we get to work on controlling the costs. Everywhere I go in Colorado, we hear, you know, that people are worried about their premiums going up, the cost of prescription drugs, the co-pays, the peaks, the limits they put on their coverage. It's outrageous. I mean, it really is outrageous. And Cory Gardner is supportive of a lawsuit in Washington that wants to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. So first, we have 2.4 million Coloradans that have pre-existing conditions who would now be at risk. They'd lose their protections. Second, you look at the 400,000 people that we'd have to roll back coverage. And what about people who have COVID, right? Who might have, their medical condition might have worsened seriously because of the COVID that they went through, and through no fault of their own, for the lack of preparation from our federal government. I think all these things have to come together. So we've got to get universal coverage, and then we've also got to control costs.
Got it. All right, so we're going to move on to the economy. What policies do you support for federal debt management?
Well, I think that this is a little bit like World War II. And when we went to war for our freedom, we recognized that we were going to have to borrow a lot of money. And we're in that same situation. And I don't know how to describe it in any other way, but to say, if we walk away from when all these small businesses are in their time of need, shame on us. And I think that we'll have repercussions and terrible consequences for years if we're not able to put the money into the system and make sure that those small businesses, they're the creators of jobs, right? really super large companies, very few of them are actually creating new jobs. They acquire another company, they merge together, they shed jobs. That's how they finance those giant mergers. Small businesses is where we have to focus. So I would look at, in addition to making sure that we have more money and access to capital, making sure it goes to the smallest small businesses. And why can't we use things like withholding taxes, which the federal government takes money out of people's bills? If we want workers to get money, let's reverse that and let the withholding tax system provide the liquidity, the money going back into the system. I think we also, when we went through the worst fires and worst floods when I was governor of Colorado, we learned that you can't, when people have lost so much, you can't go back and tell them, I'm going to make it back, I'm going to build it back the way it was. That's not enough when people have lost so much. You've got to build it back better than it was. You've got to build resiliency into the system, like we did with our floods and our fires. We build ourselves stronger. We got to do the same thing here. We've got to raise the minimum wage. We've got to recognize that kids, or every parent needs childcare so they can go to work. They need paid family leave. We need to use those building blocks. Let's increase the earned income tax credit so working people can keep more of their money. So that gets them into the system. But then, for those small businesses, more access to capital. And it's not just from the CARES Act. Let's give incentives to the smaller banks to really go out and lend. After the San Francisco earthquake, that Bank of America was just starting. I think it was called the Bank of Italy, or it had a different name. But the guy who started that went out and he gave loans to the small businesses and they paid him back. I mean, it makes sense to do that. This country is just aching to have all these small businesses come back and be set free, so they can really, create a resurgence of our economy that drives not just employment but economic growth, the ability for people to gain. Let's look at how many people can buy houses if we do everything I just said.
Awesome. I think because we talked a little bit about COVID, I'm going to stay on the economy for one more question, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
That is, what's your ideal plan for reinvigorating the economy given the impact from COVID-19? You've talked a little bit about that with regard to the small business, but just from a much more focused effort, what do you think that we need to do to reinvigorate the economy?
Well, first we have to recognize how much damage has been done, and that damage has not been equal across all segments of society. You can read the newspapers every day. There are lots of businesses, there are lots of whole industries where they're pretty much going along. They're not going to have that bad a year. Whereas I can't tell you how many people I know who have not just lost their job, but they've lost their career. They don't know how they're going to come back. When you start a small business, whether it's a hardware store or a restaurant, a hair salon, your employees become your family. And for so many of those businesses, if we don't find a pathway to allow them to come back, it is a tragedy that breaks my heart. And I sat down and seen people that I've worked beside, and I've watched them build their business for 20 and 25 years. And I've seen their employees learn and rise, and they're making real money, and they own a house, and they've created a real future for themselves, and that's all at risk. So I'll reemphasize some of those basic building blocks, right? The minimum wage, the paid leave, childcare for everyone who needs it, earned income tax credit. But also, I want to get rid of some of all the red tape that makes it hard for someone to start their business. Starting small businesses, restaurants, hair salons, this has been a pathway for immigrants, for people out of poverty, for as long as we've been Americans. And this is something which I think we need to put a huge focus on. So get rid of the red tape that makes that harder for people to start a business. But let's also find, as I said, more access to capital. Let's start trying to create networks and incentivize other businesses to mentor those small businesses. There are certain communities that have done that. Why aren't we doing that at scale, on a national level? Make sure that we are providing real incentives and real motivation for one business to help another business. Obviously, in a different industry, you don't want people to help their competitors, but you do want to make it so that there is a real commitment that we recognize that this is a rising tide. You know, when I first opened the Wine Coop Brewing Company, I'd been out of work for 2 years, and the rent down in Lodo was $1 a square foot per year. No one thought we had a prayer. And we went into business. We were too dumb to know how dumb we were. And I went to work with the other entrepreneurs, the other restaurant owners, and there are a couple of small developers. And we worked together. We tried to make Lower Downtown a place. We stuck up for each other. We marketed each other's businesses. When we first opened Wine Coop, I put signs up in the vestibule of the Wine Coop, advertising the Wazee Supper Club or McCormick's Fish House. People said I was crazy. But in the end, by working together, that's how you really energize success and you provide that momentum. And, you know, it took a while. I'm not saying there were 4 or 5 years of 80-hour weeks and sometimes lying awake at night trying to figure out how I was going to make payroll. Oh, and all of us down there went through that. But as we came out of it, we were so committed to each other. And that's the best way to succeed, is when you've got, you know, a group of people that are all committed to each other. And this country used to be that way. This COVID-19 might actually be the catalyst by which we can somehow find that unity. It's not going to be that way as long as we have President Trump in office and Mitch McConnell in the majority seat and Cory Gardner representing the state of Colorado in the Senate.
Great, thank you. Let's go down that path. Let's go a little bit further down that path and talk about income equity. You know, there's sort of, people talk about equality and then there's equity. I'm really wanting us to focus on equity because I think if we go down the path of equality, we'll be here for a while. But what do you think are the main causes to income inequity? And how do we address those causes?
Sure, and that is subject of endless debate. But I will say it is there. There are a number of different sources for that. Some of it is racism, some of it is sexism, some of it is people actually trying to create hurdles and making it more difficult for people to start a business or to grow a business. Just like there are people out there trying to make it more difficult to vote, right? Seems like every night Donald Trump goes on TV and talks about how vote by mail is corrupt and it's a fraud, and you know, he tries to make sure no one will do it because he's hoping they can't do it. He'd love to get rid of the Postal Service because that's his form of inequity in terms of voting and gives him an advantage. So some of the inequity is the size, that we no longer worry about large companies. There's been a significant drop-off of people starting their own businesses, which is one of the, as I've said again and again and again, one of the greatest ways for someone to climb that ladder of success and be able to actually buy a house and send their kids to college and build a better life for themselves, their children, their family. Those challenges that are put in their way, part of it is that as more and more companies are larger and larger, it makes it harder for a small company to actually start. In other words, there's such a competitive disadvantage. That's inequity, and we didn't used to allow it. The bottom line is, going back to probably 1950 or 55, we started allowing the erosion of those protections for working people. I mean, when you look at the shrinking of the middle class, it has largely happened from 1975, really took off during Ronald Reagan's time in the 1990s. That erosion, if you map it, it's almost identical to the erosion of labor unions. And you know, labor unions had gotten into trouble. There was corruption. That doesn't mean that workers shouldn't be allowed to organize themselves and make sure that they get a fair deal. And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of as we recognize what equity is and how inequitable it is, and what it used to be in this country. And I look at what and you talked a little bit about the national debt. I'll return to that. At the end of World War II, we had an enormous level of debt compared to our GDP. I mean, even beyond what we'll have at the end of COVID-19. And yet we were unified on it. And at the end of the war, we took on the Marshall Plan because we knew we had to invest in the economies of Germany and Europe and China and the Far East, or else we wouldn't have a secure world. We couldn't have something where we could build a future. So we did that. And then we had the GI Bill, and we borrowed more money to make sure everyone coming back could get an education to help, be part of the infrastructure that allowed us to build this new economy that would benefit everyone. Then, of course, then Eisenhower came along and we decided to build the interstate highway system, borrowed more money. We borrowed because we were building infrastructure that would lead to a better future for everyone. And we were unified in it. We got to get back to that. And again, if there's one silver lining of COVID, at least it gives us a chance that we can make those infrastructure investments. We can, protect working people. We can, dramatically improve our education system. And again, move towards that ultimate dream of equal opportunity.
So I'm gonna go down this path just a little bit further and talk a little bit about tax policy. Do you think that there are benefits to a flat tax? And if so, what do you think they are? What do you think those benefits are?
The only place, I'm not a tax expert, as a small business guy, like anybody, I hated taxes. It's just what it is. You work so hard and it's just, when you're a small business person, it's always, at least for a long time, it becomes a real struggle. My understanding of where a flat tax works, and there are certain countries in Europe that have a tax that's on all commodities, all goods that are purchased, consumer goods, and there's that base tax. I know that that's a system that works in Europe. We've talked about it a lot in the United States. For a lot of Americans, it's a real challenge, and they are dead set against it. Historically, if you, again, go back to World War II, and I don't want to be a rusty wheel, but we recognize that the people that have succeeded greatly, back then they had a real sense of responsibility to help the next generation. And that next generation wasn't just their kids. It was the kids lived down the road. I grew up in a part of this funny little town on the edge of Philadelphia. And across the hedge in the back was the postman. And then on the other side was the guy who was the butcher at the local department store. And then on the other side was a doctor. And both the mother and the father were doctors. And they had a bigger house. But everyone knew each other. We all went and on Halloween, we went around and trick-or-treated together. It was one neighborhood. And that was the way America worked back then. Whereas now we live in these separate places. We create these imaginary barriers that in many cases, create the inequities that we've been discussing. And ultimately are holding everyone back. And whether it's a flat tax or a tax like at the end of World War II, that where people that were more successful did reach out and recognize that they were helping the next generation, the entire next generation. And they would make those investments in public education because they realized that that was something that not only would help that next generation, but it would help them. A rising tide lifts all ships. So I'm not a huge supporter of a flat tax. Again, I understand how it's had real application and successful application in Europe. And I'm certainly open to learn more. So, I think I got to get over my, the whole, any small business person is always going to have a hard time talking about a flat tax or, any tax.
Understood. And I'm grateful that you mentioned the notion of the next generation and education. Speaking of which, do you support free public colleges? And if so, what's your plan to pay for it?
So I understand, again, in Europe, they have free public colleges. They don't have that many colleges, and it's very selective to get in. I believe that it should be a sliding scale. The kids that want to go to college and can't afford it, they should pay it based on need. And I worked incredibly hard while I was mayor of Denver to create the Denver Scholarship Fund, which just a week ago got the city council passed the statute that allows the initiative that passed the ballot to go into effect. So now every kid in Denver is going to be able to go to college if they go to college in Colorado and come out with essentially almost no debt. I mean, next to nothing for debt. I think community colleges, they are going to be, as our economy begins to change and evolve, community colleges are going to become more and more important, and they should be free if people can't afford them. I do have a problem if you're going to try and have free colleges, free university and free college in the United States. we have so many wealthy people that are already going to college, and I'm not sure they need the subsidy. And most of them, I don't think are asking for the subsidy. So a sliding scale, I think, and then scholarship support. I mean, look at the Pell Grants. Why don't we double the size of the Pell Grants, right? If you want to take people that are challenged and coming out with too much debt, let's help them. But we don't, we have to be frugal and make sure that we're spending all the money properly.
Got it. Thank you. I'm gonna ask one final question on our list of questions, and then we'll go to the list that some of the attendees have actually added. One final question, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier. You were talking about sort of addressing or at least redressing the issues of sexism in our country. And I guess the primary question I would ask is, will you sign an oath to believe survivors?
Yes, absolutely. Without thinking, I think the enormous history of sexism in this country and certainly sexual abuse, sexual crime requires us, if a woman has the courage to come forward, we should believe her.
Yeah, and so along the same lines, though, what's your approach to addressing institutional sexism?
Sexism is sexism, and this leads you into challenging situations. But are we trying to work with our better angels? Are we trying to get to a more perfect union? I hope so. And institutional sexism is in many cases more pernicious because it goes unobserved too often. My wife Robin is a executive at a large corporation. She loves her job, she loves her boss, but she sees it. Not just she'll see it sometimes in her company, not so much in her company, but I hear the stories of what her friends are going through and the stumbling blocks. Some of it is just all the traditions that men have that allow them to help themselves up. And in many cases, this isn't just sexism. It crosses over into racism and all kinds of marginalized people being disadvantaged. You look at how much business gets done on a golf course, and yet a lot of people aren't made to feel welcome on golf courses. Again, you would argue that's a very small. I'm not saying that's a big deal or that it's a glaring example of sexism. But I think if you look at who's playing golf and what it looks like, there are women. I'm not, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I think that's a level of institutionalized sexism that we should be addressing. And we tried to, every place I've been, we tried to measure, how many women did I appoint to boards and commissions? Because that's what allows women, especially women who didn't grow up in a middle-class family, that allows them to interact and see different avenues for their advancement and where they can do better. Again, all my appointees, mayors, governor, when I was in the restaurant business, I always believed that we want to make sure that diversity is an essential part of our companies, of our administrations, of everything we do. I remember when we first opened the Wine Coop back in '88, in the summer of '89, our general manager left, and there was a guy, Chris Horner, a wonderful guy, openly gay, and he was the bar manager, and we made him the manager. He was the right guy. We weren't going to find anybody better. And we had several customers. Again, this is 1989 that came up and said, I'm not sure we're going to go to your place. You're going to get a lot of pushback. And we sat down with all the employees. We had an all-employee meeting, and everyone, bought into it. This was our response, was to back Chris Horner up 1,000%. And all of a sudden, A, part of it was Chris Horner was a really good manager, but B, everybody was focused on going above and beyond because they had a mission now, and that mission was that everyone was equal, and they wanted to be part of that. I think that mission's got to be involved in every mayoral administration, every gubernatorial administration, in everything that all of us do.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a quick break in sort of the hard questions and give you one that's sort of a little bit of a softball.
Those are always the hard ones, Lisa. You know that. It's going to be the hard one.
If you're elected, what will be your first bill that you introduce? That comes from one of our county precinct chairs, and that's Tim Currington.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate the question. And, you know, this is not a normal situation. And, you know, I've been very focused on trying to figure out what the priority should be. And if you look at what the Trump administration has done to the EPA, but not just the EPA, to the Department of Agriculture, to the Department of the Interior, so many places they are stripping away regulations that have protected our air and our water, have protected our food, have protected our supply of prescription drugs. All these things, it's just getting ripped away. And a lot of times they are trying to go so fast that they're not going to be able to get everything done. And I think just maybe that the first bill that we should pass would be to stop everything in its tracks and really, you know, make sure we'd have to do it during the transition. We'd have to make sure we're not cutting off a budget, you know, payroll, people would miss their paychecks. We have to make sure we're not, you know, cutting off our nose to spite our face, as my grandmother used to say. We'd have to make sure that we're not creating harm in this process. But I want to make sure that the damage that we're going to have to repair is as minimal as possible. So I think that would be the absolute first thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be done.
Great. So that was your sort of reprieve, right? That gave you a chance to. There was another question, and this one is from Sean Matthews, and I'm going to sort of paraphrase. I can't get to the whole question, but I'll say regarding the income equity, what policies would you support to work to eliminate gender pay discrepancies, right, as well as the gap between executive compensation and worker compensation?
So say that last part. Say that last part again.
So regarding income equity, what policies would you support to eliminate gender pay discrepancies?
Got that one. I got that part.
As well as the gap between executive compensation and non-executive compensation. So executives and worker pay.
So gender discrimination, which clearly exists, first is there are a couple bills in Congress that really address equal pay. They've been obviously tied up because Mitch McConnell doesn't want them to see the light of day. And the payroll equity is, I mean, that's a good place to start. But I also think we have to protect women from, in other words, when they're being hired, they are routinely asked how much they got paid at the previous job. And study after study demonstrates that that's a way to hold them down. That the person doing the hiring says, well, I'm not going to pay you what you're worth. I'm going to pay you a little more than what you were making before. And it continues to the inequity continues to persist. So I think that, you know, making sure that women have the right not to say what they were paid. And I think also let's get transparency in what companies pay everybody. And companies are going to fight this tooth and nail. But, you know, it's a fairly big movement now to have open payrolls. And it creates real teamwork. It makes the workforce become a community, and they become more committed to each other's success and do all those things that I think any business would want. So I think that, I mean, there's a whole list of stuff. I won't go down the whole list. I think in terms of the executive compensation, that's difficult. And I think there might be a formula that we could put in place that would allow some restraint. You know, you look at the ratio between the different, you know, what the ratio is between the executives paid the most and what their lowest paid worker gets. that creates a real incentive for the executive to pay to bring everybody back up and pay them more. I think there are a lot of legal challenges that would be a battle. Historically, the way people have addressed this is by uh, uh, a sliding scale taxation that takes into account. If you go back and historically, we had much higher rates of taxation, and we had much lower magnitudes of wage discrimination.
Got it. Okay, so just a quick sort of fun question. Somebody asked if you would introduce your dog. Your dog.
So that is Sky. She's Heinz 54. We got her from the shelter rescue up in Fort Collins, connected with the vet school, and then we sent her out to one of the prisons, and we have a program in Colorado where inmates are allowed the opportunity to become dog trainers and to learn how to train dogs. And we sent her out there for a month. It was I can't remember what the cost was, but it was a lot of money, but it was worth it, because she came back and here she is, a dog of the streets. While I was governor, we spent a couple of years living in the mansion. And so my wife, Robin, would always say, "There's Sky, dog of the streets who lives in a mansion." but she's a good dog. I mean, she's a good guard dog. She barks. She's never bitten anyone. Right. She's now 7 years old. She's part of the family, as she should be.
Nice. All right. So now I'm going to go back to the harder questions. And I apologize for those who have actually, you've got questions that are sort of above the, like they were early on. It's harder to go back to them, but I will definitely send those to your campaign. Sure. So that you.
And I will look at every question that I don't get to answer. Send to the campaign. We'll get you an answer, but I guarantee you, I will look at them myself personally, awesome. And make sure that the answer that you get is something that I sign off on and that I'm committed to.
So Carson Black asked, Governor Hickenlooper, do you support universal basic income?
So thank you, Carson, for the question. And I think that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue, depending on the magnitude of COVID-19 and what it does to our economy. And how do we, especially young people, how do we keep them engaged? And I've been supportive of having some sort of a service year, a way to engage young people and make sure they've got something constructive and they can get paid. Guaranteed income, and it was interesting to watch how it unfolded during the presidential campaign, because it was really split. And to be quite honest, I've gone back. I originally was against it, then I was for it. Now I'm more back on the fence. Just because you don't want to take away people's incentive to work. And I understand a basic income is not going to take away their incentive. But I look back now, and one of the things I worry with my son, he's just graduating from high school. And when I first opened that restaurant and I worked, we paid ourselves $24,000, which is $12 an hour if you work 40 hours. But we were working literally 75 and 80 hours. So we're paying ourselves $6 an hour for 4 or 5 or probably almost 5 years at that level. And I look back on that as some of my happiest times, where I suffered, in ways, it felt like sometimes I'd get home just in time to go to sleep and my alarm went off it seemed like a nanosecond. And yet I look at the relationships and how rich my life was and how meaningful that was to me. And I hope, I talked to my son about this, I hope that he can find something that he cares about and pushes him to get engaged at that level. Maybe not 80 hours a week, but and maybe not for a long period of time, because again, that was just in my nature. I was just obsessed and driven to make this thing successful. But anyway, I apologize, and if they write that question in, and I'll sit down and take a firm stand one way or the other here.
All right, I will send that along with the other questions as well. One final question before I'll allow you the few minutes to do your closing, and that is, what distinguishes you from Andrew Romanoff?
Well, several things, and just to be clear, I admire Andrew. I've known him for a long time. he actually got into politics before I did. He was elected in 2000. I got elected as mayor in 2003. I mean, I'd never run for student council. I think I mentioned that, but I didn't, I was too dumb to know how little I knew. But anyway, we have very different backgrounds. And I think in terms of my small business background, where I have that 15 years, not just trying to help myself, but working with other businesses and trying to interface with the city government and the state government, there's just so many valuable lessons that have come invaluable in terms of, especially when I became governor and I worked with the General Assembly to try and make sure we got the right laws. And I look at Washington now, and in the whole U.S. Senate, 100 U.S. senators, my son looked this up and Googled all the senators. According to him, there are only 5, maybe 6 entrepreneurs, people that have actually helped start a small business or run a small business in the entire Senate. So that didn't used to be that way. That's a kind of a vanishing breed. I also have a science background. I have a master's in environmental science. We haven't gotten a chance really to talk about climate change, but go to my website, hickenlooper.com, and you will see, I think, one of the most comprehensive climate plans to address what is clearly the worst looming crisis that the Earth has ever faced. And we're running out of time on it. And, we got to address it in real time. Last thing, I ran for governor twice in 2010, 2014, 2 of the hardest years for Democrats in the last 20 years. And I went to every corner of the state and I won in both those years. I outperformed in rural areas. And I think Cory Gardner is going to be tough to beat. He's got, a huge war chest of resources. He is agile. He'll say whatever he needs to ingratiate himself. He's going to be the great friend of the environmentalists, even though he supported every single time that Donald Trump has tried to eviscerate more of the EPA. Cory Gardner is going to be able to go out there and say he's, for, you name it. We've all heard about that. I have the record in 2010, 2014 of building the partnerships and the alliance to go out and win this state, and we have to win. I have never, if you leave here with one thing tonight, and I'll say this again in my closing, I have to win. I will never forgive myself if I lose. I am working 75 and 80 hours a week, even in COVID-19, and I'm an extrovert, so I am climbing the walls. I need to see people to get energy. I am more committed to this campaign than anything I've ever done. More committed than when I ran for mayor, more committed than when I ran for governor, more committed than when I opened my first restaurant. And I know I can't do it. Well, I was going to go into my closing there. I almost slipped in. In essence, in terms of Andrew and myself, he is someone who, has a very different set of experiences than I have. And I think my set of experiences would be more valuable at this exact moment in history.
Got it. So it's at this point, I want to thank you tremendously for spending time with us and answering all the questions that we had. There are tons. Darian and I both understand the difficulty of running a campaign during COVID-19 and all of the, I'm not as extroverted as you are, but I do understand the need to get energy from actually being in the space with people. But if you would, for a moment, pretend that we're right in front of you and give us your closing.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all you Douglas County Dems. I appreciate the times I've been down there and met with small or large groups of you. We're going to win this election. We're going to beat Cory Gardner. We're going to beat Donald Trump. I think we're not going to just take 3 or 4 or 5 Republican Senate seats. I think we're going to take 5 or 6 or 7. And I feel so driven and so passionate about that. And yet I'm very, very clear that I can't do it without all your help. We're not taking any corporate money, no corporate dirty money. When you asked what my first thing I'd do in Washington, the thing I almost said was we'd get rid of Citizens United and we'd start the process of getting money out of politics. I need the help of not just Douglas County, but all across the state. And I want you to know that I have thought through so much of what's wrong with Washington. And I look at the things I've done working with the oil and gas industry and the environmental community to create the methane regulation. People that didn't like each other, didn't trust each other. But over 14 months, we got that done. When I got elected mayor of Denver, there were 34 mayors who all hated each other, or at least they all hated Denver. The suburban mayors did. Many of them Republicans or conservative independents. After 2.5 years, we got all 34 mayors to unanimously support fast tracks. We took the time to listen to them. You know, in the bar business, you learn that you never persuade someone about something they don't agree with by telling them why they're wrong and why you're right. You learn to repeat back to them when they're angry, the exact words they say. They feel validated. And that's what Washington needs. And in this funny way, I've had these experiences. I was out of work for almost 2.5 years before we opened the wine coop. When I lost my geology job, 10,000 geologists lost their jobs. So I didn't just lose my job, I lost my career. And I think that I have those experiences, having been out of work, having built something from scratch, having created a team in the restaurant and then an alliance in downtown Denver and across the state. I think I can do that on a national level. And I think I can help recreate this economy, address healthcare and climate change, finally get gun safety in place. But again, I can't do it without all of you. So thank you so much. Once this primary, well, hopefully you'll vote for me in the primary. We need every vote, and I'm taking it very seriously. But no matter who wins, we need to unify after the primary and make sure that Cory Gardner is a one-term senator. Thank you all for all your help, and thanks for the opportunity.
We appreciate you. And here's one final statement that I'll make on behalf of Darren and I, and that is all politics are local, right? And we are in this race locally to win. And we need, as much as you need our support, we need your support to ensure that we, for the first time in the history of Douglas County, actually have Dems in Douglas County the Board of Commissioner seats. So,
well, I will consider that done. I hereby pledge my support to both of you, and I'm sure Andrew will do the same. Let's make this a rising tide.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Governor Hickenlooper, for the time that you spent with us. We really appreciate you. We are so grateful to actually have the opportunity to have a lot of the candidates that come to Douglas County. We know that Douglas County hasn't really been as successful in carrying sort of the Dem, the actual Dem vote as far as we'd like it to, but we believe that this year the math works out. So we're excited. We're excited for the candidates that we have that are running, and we are excited for the candidates that we have locally and are looking for that support from you guys as well. So thanks a million. I will make sure that we get these questions back to your campaign, the ones that we didn't ask or didn't have a chance to ask. But thanks again.
No, thank you, Lisa. Have a great night. Thank you all.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.